For those who have worked in an electromechanical telephone exchange, this sound might be as iconic as the clicking of the switches themselves. This is the sound of a major alarm. As the name suggests, this alarm goes off when there's a significant problem, one that could impact the entire office's ability to provide telephone service. In this case, it's just a simple blown fuse that needs replacement. Central office alarms were essential, guiding the maintenance teams to locate and fix issues as quickly as possible. And even today, you'll still find echoes of these alarms in telecom equipment with terms like critical, major, and minor alarms. These aren't just relics. They're reminders of just how effective this signaling system has been across generations. Now, back in the days of manual switchboards and human operators, alarms weren't quite as necessary as they'd later become. You see, operators, by the nature of their job, could detect and report issues as they occurred. But the one alarm that always remained essential was the fuse alarm. And so, let's begin our journey there. We've discussed fuses before in our power video, but let's review them again here in the context of alarms. A single telephone office contained thousands of these fuses, each responsible for a specific circuit. And if one blew, technicians would need to replace it quickly, which was no small feat given the dimly lit conditions of the early 1900s and the time required to locate each fuse. So, in 1904, an inventor named Edward B. Kraft changed everything with a fuse that practically called out to be found: the grasshopper fuse. Kraft's 35 type fuse, as it was officially known, was installed in panels like this. And when it blew, a clever little mechanism triggered an alarm. Springs in the fuse would spring out in front as a visual marker and in the back to engage the alarm circuit. That circuit would sound the now familiar alarm and light lamps that helped technicians zero in on the fuse in need of replacement. And speaking of alarms, this one has a name too. It's called the tone bar, and it's manufactured by Wheelock for the Bell system. In the museum, we call it the bong, and it even has a smaller counterpart, the bing, which, if I had to guess, might be a relative of that sound you hear on The Price is Right when someone wins.
$4. Mary.
Inside, it's all remarkably simple. When powered, the coil here drives the rod upward to strike the tone bar, which then resonates in this wooden chamber, amplifying the sound. A separate interrupter, which we'll come back to soon, drives the coil at a regular cadence. In fact, the tone bar could become so annoying that technicians sometimes stuffed a sock in it just to quiet it down. Alarms like these are actually just one part of a complex signaling system. Beyond fuse alarms, there were time alarms, busy alarms, and power failure alarms. Each was indicated by a combination of an audible tone and a colored lamp. The lamps were placed strategically throughout the office to guide workers to the actual source of the alarm. Usually, they were provided at the end cap of each aisle, at central intersections, and near entry and egress points to indicate which floor the alarm was occurring on. By the mid-20th century, these alarm panels had become ubiquitous in central offices. They contained that large tone bar, plus different types of ringers that produce distinctive tones. Next to the alarm panel is a smaller fixture which houses the colored lamps. Telephone folks will tell you that the major alarm was heard most often. Minor alarms, on the other hand, used a vibrating bell and green, amber, or white lamps signaling less immediate issues, like momentary overflow conditions or time delays in equipment responses. There are way too many examples of these to cover in one video, so let's take a deeper look at one type of minor alarm to understand the basics of how they work and why they exist. In the number 1 crossbar, the originating marker is a critical piece of equipment. It's used on every call, and calls cannot complete without it. In a normal-sized crossbar office, there are usually 6 originating markers, and the traffic is distributed across all of them. A marker only takes about 400 milliseconds to do its job, and if it takes much longer than that, there's probably something wrong. And since the number of markers in an exchange is limited, we don't want to keep one completely out of service for more than a second or two. So the marker has built-in timers that begin timing when it's seized and end once its job is finished. If the timer expires without the marker having completed its task, the marker sounds an alarm and dumps its internal state to this lamp panel here, called the originating trouble indicator. The timing for the alarms is provided by this reciprocating bar interrupter here. The panel and number 1 crossbar are just full of these things, and they provide all sorts of timing signals for the switch. The interrupter is always moving under motor power, opening and closing its contacts. When the marker starts working on a call, it begins timing itself by closing a circuit from the interrupter. The timing circuit itself contains a pair of pulse-dividing relays here and several additional relays which count the pulses from the interrupter. And if we start the marker, we can see the relays go. Finally, there are power alarms, which are somewhat obviously caused by major power failures. These failures usually have a direct impact on the level of service rendered, so these alarms are very loud. In addition to the very loud vibrating gong, there's a wooden annunciator box in the power room like the one seen here above our power board. Each lamp on the annunciator has a glass lens with a number on it, and a list is posted nearby which correlates each numbered lamp with the particular failure. Depending on the exact nature of the failure, different action would need to be taken. In our 803C ringing and tone plant, for example, there are special relays that detect the various outputs of the ringing machine. These relays are kept normally operated by the output voltage of the machine. If something goes wrong with the machine or one of the outputs is lost, the normally operated detecting relay releases and closes its back contacts. When these contacts are closed, the alarm circuit is activated, lighting a lamp and sounding a bell. Central office maintenance staff were given some amount of control over the alarms. Here in the museum, if we want to release an alarm, we can operate the AR key, usually positioned at or near the frame that's in alarm. If the alarm immediately recurs, we know that the problem isn't of a momentary nature and that some greater corrective action is needed. On the other hand, if we want to cut off the audible alarm but not completely release the alarm condition itself, we can operate the ACO key. This will cut off the audible portion of alarm, but leave the visual lamps engaged. This is useful when we know the alarm condition isn't going to be fixed right away, but we just don't want to hear the gong going off anymore. But what good would alarms do if offices weren't staffed? For much of the 20th century, rural parts of the United States used CDOs, or community dial offices. These were telephone exchanges that were designed to provide unattended dial service to communities with up to a few hundred telephone lines. Because rural areas were, by definition, sparsely populated, these offices didn't have a full-time staff. They were usually only visited by maintenance workers if something was wrong or a service change needed to be made. So most CDOs provided a dial-in number that centrally located operators could use to determine if an alarm condition was present. Our CX100 community dial office from the early 1940s provides this feature. If I dial 2381, I will hear one of 4 distinctive things depending on the state of the machine. That way, if there is trouble, someone could be sent out to handle it. Strangely enough, Cities didn't get these features until the mid-1960s. Since most of the big city offices were staffed 24/7, there really was not any need to send alarms elsewhere. But that all changed with the newest ESS machines. By this point, switches had become so reliable that there wasn't any need to have workers on site 24 hours a day. And since they were now software controlled, many problems could be fixed remotely without having people in the central office. Our 3 ESS switch was one of these types. Designed to be run unstaffed for long periods, the alarms would print here on the maintenance TTY, which turned on automatically when printing started and off when it was done. Meanwhile, a modem sent the same information to a central monitoring site where a technician could be dispatched if necessary. Even in the older number 5 crossbar offices, technicians could still go home at night. The trouble recorder printed out each machine failure on these wide cards and deposited them into an output bin. Later on, an adjunct was installed that digitally sent the office alarms over a modem, just like in ESS offices. Further, this little computer here could take the place of the trouble recorder altogether, scanning and digitizing the data to be diagnosed with software on a centrally located PDP-11 computer. Even today, in systems like the DMS-10, we see the descendants of these alarms divided into similar categories: critical, major, minor, that all trace back to those first bells, bongs, and flashing lights of the 20th century exchanges. Only in these more recent systems, the alarm reporting is totally automated, and administrators can run tests at their convenience to diagnose and replace faulty equipment. And since these systems are so reliable, they can go a very long time without any human interaction at all. The funny thing is, in the museum, many of the alarms aren't wired up at all. Some of these systems, like our number 1 crossbar, are almost always an alarm because these systems require equipment that we just don't have. For instance, since we only have one originating marker in the 1XB, the all markers busy alarm would go off every single time the marker was in use, every single time it connects a phone call. Another reason for disconnecting some of them is to avoid creating a sense of complacency around real alarms when they do go off. So, almost all of the audible and visual signals here in the museum are directly actionable, and they mean business. Also, I almost always know when there's a problem just by listening to the machines. They have a cadence to them and a certain musical quality to their sounds. I can tell what each sound means, and I can tell almost instantly if something sounds wrong. Sometimes guests on my tours will even see me abruptly stop talking, run away to fix something, and then return to continue the tour. These machines feel like people to me, and just like you can tell how your friends are feeling by the sound of their voice, you could tell how these machines are feeling by the rhythm of their sounds.
Hi, I'm Claire, and I make the merch for the Seattle Museum and handle our archival work. We're a 100% volunteer-run, nonprofit organization and are supported primarily by donations from visitors or viewers like you. There are new designs in our store at cottonbureau.com, including this one I'm currently wearing, commemorating our step-by-step switch. So if you'd like a cool shirt while also helping to support us, please check it out. There's a discount code in the doobly-doo. Bye!